Fantastic to have you here, Tash, and speaking to us. Tash is a consumer survivor worker with a particular focus on children and young people in the tertiary mental health system. Tash is a consumer academic at the University of Melbourne, a lived experience advisor to the UK-based Wellcome Trust, a member of the 2022 Victorian Youth Congress, and lived experience lead in mental health at the Royal Children's Hospital. That is quite a set of credentialing, Tash. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Belinda. Welcome, everyone. I'm just about to share some slides. There we go. So as Belinda flagged, hoping to have a bit of a chat with everyone today for Mental Health Week, but particularly from a consumer survivor lens. So I think that there's a lot of good that we talk about when it comes to Mental Health Week, and I want to acknowledge that there certainly is a lot of good that does and can come from Mental Health Week. But there are critical perspectives of Mental Health Week that come from consumer and survivor lenses. So something quite recently published by Simon Cattle, quite a leader in the consumer survivor space, was that Mental Health Week risks becoming a ritual of ineffective and disorganised messages. A greater risk is that this disorganisation will function to reinforce the status quo when our systems and communities need dramatic change. Centering lived experience perspectives is one way to organise around that change. I think something else that comes up and is quite a personal lens for me is that Mental Health Week does still predominantly focus on higher prevalence disorders such as depression and anxiety, but there's little discussion about psychosis, personality, and other disorders, which really does risk continued stigma and alienation of those who identify with these diagnoses. But there is good news. Here at the Children's, we're really taking big steps right now to ensure consumer and carers are genuinely embedded throughout our service. And it's steps like these, alongside the work of all of our mental health staff and all of our staff across the entire hospital in undergoing this significant consumer and carer-led transformation, that enables Mental Health Week to become more than just a gesture. Through this, it allows us to have honest and challenging conversations that allow us all to grow and better serve the communities that we serve. But I think that raises a question, and it brings us back to the topic of today's session: mental health. Is it everyone's business? And to talk about this, I'd like to have a little bit of a reflection on some of my own experiences. So at about age 8, I started suffering with some mood issues, some anxiety issues. At that age, you don't really recognise it. You know something's not quite right, but is it that big of a deal? I don't know. That progressed quite quickly into self-harm. It would take 8 years before someone would recognise that I was self-harming and actively discuss it with me. In Year 12, during BCE, I became acutely suicidal. No one really recognised, but then I got a mark back on an essay I'd done in English, and I wasn't happy with it. A teacher recognised and called me down to his office during lunch. Didn't have to do that. Didn't necessarily know that something was drastically wrong, but him doing that saved my life. Calling me down to his office, I broke down in tears. Couldn't explain myself, couldn't articulate what was going on, but he called my mum, and mum took me to the GP after school. GP asked the question I was dreading: are you suicidal? And the answer terrified me because it was yes. But it was a combination of those 3 people, that teacher, my mum, and that GP, that would start my journey towards healing. Without those 3 people having the language and the understanding to ask those questions and to recognise that something might not be quite right, I certainly wouldn't be here today. I've lived with mental health issues for the last 12 years of my life. And there are some key takeaways that I think about when we talk about mental health. Is it everyone's business? In my experience, family members didn't have the language or understanding to identify emerging mental health issues. Teachers and other adults around me typically weren't confident in bringing up these issues either. School, extracurricular activities, and media, all of the things I was involved in, none of them seemed to expose me to healthy ways of coping. there was a significant stigma around voice hearing, and that was really an active inhibitor for me in seeking support. Media portrayals, societal expectations, particularly around eating disorders, led to an exacerbated eating disorder pattern as well as compensatory behaviours, and again, were active inhibitors for seeking support. Complex mental health issues weren't generally understood, and standard messages of quick and complete recoveries really did lead to further hopelessness, distress, shame, and heartache for not only myself, but for those around me. And the effects and interactions of trauma, as well as complex trauma, weren't well understood or explored in relation to what I was experiencing, delaying my recovery and my understanding of myself. But if we think about mental health as being everyone's business, there are some really key changes that would have impacted my life, that of those around me, but also every young person in the community and every young person we see here at the hospital. Everyone, families, friends, supporters, teachers, if we're further exposed to understandings of language, we can talk about our own as well as others' experiences of mental health. Healthy coping mechanisms, including harm minimization, would be part of our natural progression in school, outside of school, and beyond. We begin to break down stigma around experiences that are more stigmatized, less spoken about, and often associated with violence and other negative stereotypes. Seeking support for mental health is normalized. There's less fear about consequences like compulsory treatment or employment, education, relationships, and beyond. And the media accepts their role and their responsibility in regards to the portrayals of mental health, their position in educating without stigma, including the need to prioritise lived experience voices. I've left you with a lot to think about, I hope, but this is something that I definitely reflect on quite regularly, and acknowledging that the mental health system and wider services across the hospital are undergoing a lot of change at the moment. This is something I come back to. This is something that really promotes my mental health. So grant me the patience to accept the systems I cannot change today, the courage to strategically enact progress where and when I can, and the wisdom to know that, despite structural oppression, I do make a difference. I appreciate all of your time today. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I was saying, Tash, I could listen to you for ages, the richness of your experience and the leadership role that you have now with Jane and Rick and the mental health team is inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing both your lived experience and your insights with us, Tash. Thank you so much.